And I'll pass this to Lee to talk to us on a more local level of what we can do.
Okay, good evening all. Friends and any Metropolitan Police officers in the house. If you've struck up a new relationship recently, I think you need to check them out. I just came from George Galloway. He's telling me how police officers infiltrated his house and took one of his staff, and it's a whole big story. I'm sure you've seen it in there. And we all know the MPS provocation for sending in undercover officers to find out what's going on. So if you are in here, Metropolitan Police Service, everything I say is perfectly judiciable in law. You can challenge me or arrest me on my way out. We've only got a few minutes, and just first of all say, what a champion for Robert. I've met him before. We spoke at in ULU meetings some months ago. It was a pleasure to meet him then, and it's a pleasure to share the platform now. Only 5 minutes, and so just a summary. I mean, I think that the process of extraordinary rendition, that's what they used to call it, didn't they? Extraordinary rendition, is similar to what happened to us as African slaves. I think we were extraordinarily rendered from our place in Africa to many places around the world. So I think the analogy between slavery and rendition is one that is appropriate. And it's one of the things that governments throughout the world do is practice their human rights abuses on the most unpopular minority in any community, in any nation. What they like to do is target Roma asylum seekers, or target black youth, or target the Muslim community in terms of anti-terrorism, because the press have whipped up sentiment against that group, and they're able to get away with human rights abuses at that group. The rest of us sit back and think, well, that's got nothing to do with me, and then 5-10 years later down the road, we find that law is applied to us. If you look at the history of this legislation throughout this country, you can see that. I remember in the 70s when black kids were getting stopped and searched and beaten up by the police. We were saying it was a disgrace. Some communities said, well, the black community is inherently criminal, that's why they're getting that kind of policing, and it's not an issue for us. And now those very same communities are subject to the same disproportional level of stop and search that we are. I think we look at immigration. We in the black community watch the immigration laws come in, that first initially apply to the Asian community, and think, well, they've got nothing to do with us. And some of us may have even shared some views that there are far too many Asians coming into the country. So the legislation is right. And we thought that we were somehow protected. 20 years later, we can't even get our granny to come here on a holiday anymore. The tax for going to the Caribbean has gone, the airport tax has gone through the roof, so we can't go and visit them. And our people are stuck in queues, both African, Caribbean and Asian, as long as you like, with a UK border authority that thinks if you're black, you're bogus, whatever your passport or your nationality. And so what we see is that the short-termism of thinking that that's got nothing to do with me is foolhardy and a fool's economy. What you see happen to the weakest of us is destined to happen to all of us, even if you don't agree with the minority concerned. And so it may be, deeply unpopular. It may be very popular. What I'm saying is that we don't do what's popular, we do what's right. And what is right is that we work together as communities to defend ourselves against this kind of legislation. And Europe is going through a recession at the moment. And that recession means racism rises. You've seen what's happening in Greece. Right now they are walking around in fascist mobs, chasing African migrants, Asians, Somali, anybody who doesn't look Greek. They're chasing them through the streets. The police are not protecting them. They are rounding up anybody black for deportation. That's what's happening in Greece. And we know the history of Europe and recession. From the First and the Second World Wars, we know when their economy goes down, racism goes up. No coincidence that Stephen Lawrence died during the last mini recession, the 91-93 recession. It's no coincidence that the BNP and the National Front came to prominence in the United Kingdom during the 80s. What time was it? It was a period of a recession. This is the deepest and most profound recession that we've ever been in. And if you look what's happening in continental Europe, And I know we always look to the United States as our sort of cousins in the struggle. But there are 22 million African, Caribbean, Asian people in Europe, and the majority of them don't have passports, majority of them can't travel, majority of them don't have rights. And my worry is that Europe sets the precedent. And if a right-wing drift in Europe takes place, and the European Union is dominated by racists and extreme right and fascists, we here in the United Kingdom could see changes to European legislation that affects us. So whilst we've still got the space and energy to fight, we should be fighting not just with our communities here, but our communities internationally in relation to Europe as well. And I think the other thing is there's too much of a false division between communities. You know, Muslim communities and African communities. We've got the similar issues in terms of this judicial system. We're overrepresented in the judicial system. For every 1,000 white people, there are 1.2 white people in jail. For every 1,000 Asians, there are 2.4 Asians in jail. You know the figures on their national representation. For every 1,000 African and Caribbeans, there are 7 black people in jail. You get the huge level of disproportionality there. And the Muslim community since 9/11 has been rising further up in stop and searches, further up in terms of incarceration, further up in terms of miscarriages of justice, such as we've seen. And, you know, I agree with Chomsky on the point that international multi-rich elites abhor democracy. They hate democracy. They give you the impression that human rights and democracy is the very thing that they're fighting for. They're not fighting for it. They'd have a heart attack if you had 100% turnout in their British elections. It's not where their interests lie. Their interests lie in keeping us docile, keeping us out of the political arena, keeping us on our knees and not voting. We've got to break those divisions because those are meant to divide us. And right now, we've got the most profound economic challenge we've ever faced in the world. And let's face it, when Europe goes into recession, the one thing that they go for, historically, is war. When a European nation finds it hasn't got any more natural resources or any internal resource, what does it do? It fakes up some human rights agenda. Let's save the Syrian people. On a human rights agenda. Meanwhile, they're taking British citizens, locking them up on a virtual plantation in Guantanamo Bay, and leaving them without any access to judicial rights. That's why we were happy to support the campaign for Baba Ahmed when we were in City Hall, and why we continue to do so even now. So I think that, you know, there's a big call out going on next year. Next year is 50 years since the Martin Luther King I Had a Dream speech, 1963, the March on Washington. And 2013 will be 50 years. We've got to ask ourselves, King was an icon, international icon for human rights, equality and justice. This dream of Dr. King's, are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. How far have we got to go? I've just done an analysis of every key sector in British society. And I've looked at how many African, Caribbean and Asian people they are recruiting in terms of employment and representation into the criminal justice system or the health service or teaching or so on and so forth. And I extrapolated that formula to calculate how long at the present rate of progress each sector will take to achieve equality, so that they would look like the community that they serve. I can tell you, when I did it, I presented it yesterday to a big conference in Liverpool. And it takes between 150 and 350 years at the present rate of progress for England to achieve race equality in terms of representation. But I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared to wait 350 years, 150 years to get equality, to be a fully equal British citizen. I want to be equal now. My human rights demand it. I'm fully in support of this campaign and all the other campaigns, and I hope we can work together further in the future. Thank you very much.